The air in the negotiation chamber tasted of metal and tension. Captain Amy Foster sat perfectly still across the circular table, her hands folded calmly on the scratched surface. Across from her, War Chief Grath loomed like a mountain of scales and muscle. His reptilian features twisted into what might have been a smile, though on a Kravik it looked more like a threat. "Your terms are weak, human," Grath rumbled, his voice like grinding stone. "You come to our territory. You want our minerals. Yet you offer us scraps." Amy kept her expression neutral. She had been in hostile negotiations before, but the Kraviks were something else entirely. They were warriors first, diplomats never. Everything was a test of dominance with them. "The terms are fair," Amy replied evenly. 60-40 split on mining profits. Full environmental protections. Safe passage guarantees. Grath's clawed hand slammed onto the table. The sound echoed through the chamber like a gunshot. 2 Kravik guards standing by the walls shifted their weight, hands moving closer to their weapons. Amy noticed but did not flinch. "Fair?" Grath hissed. "You think you can dictate fairness here? On Crosspoint 7 in neutral space surrounded by my warriors." Behind Grath, Commander Drell stood with arms crossed. He was smaller than the war chief, his scales a darker shade of green. His eyes never left Amy, studying her like a predator watches prey. She had noticed him from the moment she entered. He was the thinker in the room. Grath was the hammer, but Drell was the one who decided where it fell. Amy leaned back slightly in her chair. Not far enough to seem afraid, but enough to appear relaxed. It was a calculated gesture. Show no fear. Give no ground. "I think," Amy said carefully, "that fairness benefits both our peoples. Earth needs the minerals. You need the trade routes and technology we offer. This is partnership, not conquest." Grath's eyes narrowed. For a long moment, the chamber was silent except for the low hum of the station's life support systems. Then the war chief reached down to his belt. His clawed fingers wrapped around something small and round. Amy's heart rate increased, but her face remained calm. She recognized the object immediately. A plasma grenade. Class 3 explosive device. Standard Kravik military issue. She had defused hundreds like it during her years in ordnance disposal. Grath held the grenade up, letting her see it clearly. Then, with deliberate slowness, he pulled the activation pin. A soft beeping sound filled the room. The grenade's outer shell began to glow with a dull red light. "Let me show you something about Kravik negotiations," Grath said. His voice was calm now, almost casual. He set the armed grenade on the table between them. Then, with a flick of his massive wrist, he rolled it across the surface toward Amy. The grenade wobbled slightly as it traveled, the beeping growing louder. Amy watched it roll closer. Her diplomatic team at the edge of the room gasped. One of them started to move forward, but Amy raised her hand slightly, stopping them without looking away from the grenade. The device came to rest about 2 feet from her side of the table. Still beeping. Still glowing red. In about 8 seconds it would detonate. The blast would tear through flesh and bone. At this range it would be fatal to anyone without armor. Grath leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. His expression was smug. This was the moment. This was where the soft human would panic. Where she would scramble backward, maybe dive for cover, certainly lose all pretense of dignity and control. Then he would disarm it with a laugh, and she would accept whatever terms he demanded just to get out of this room alive. Amy looked at the grenade. Then she looked at Grath. She had perhaps 5 seconds now. Her mind worked quickly, the way it always did when explosives were involved. She observed the room as she had been observing it since she arrived. The blast barriers positioned carefully around the Kravik side of the table. The reinforced corner where Grath sat. The way the guards stood behind additional shielding. The thermal readings she had quietly noted on her handheld scanner when they first entered. She saw the grenade's glow. Not quite right for a live plasma charge. The heat signature was off by several degrees. The beeping was regular, but the pitch was slightly different from an armed device. 3 seconds. Amy's boot moved. One smooth motion, not rushed, not panicked. Her foot connected with the grenade and sent it rolling back across the table. It traveled the same path in reverse, wobbling slightly, beeping steadily. It rolled right back toward Grath. Then Amy did something that made every Kravik in the room freeze. She smiled. Not a nervous smile. Not a relieved smile. A knowing, almost amused smile that showed just a hint of teeth. "Nice try," she said. The grenade reached Grath's side of the table and dropped over the edge into his lap. The war chief's eyes went wide. For just a fraction of a second, genuine surprise flashed across his reptilian features. Then the grenade detonated. The explosion was small, contained by the blast barriers around the Kravik position. Smoke billowed up from behind the reinforced corner. The sound was loud but not deafening. When the smoke cleared, Grath sat exactly where he had been, completely unharmed. The barriers had absorbed everything. The chamber was silent. Every Kravik warrior stood frozen, staring at the human who had just kicked an armed grenade back at their war chief without hesitation. Without fear. With a smile. Amy remained seated, her hands still folded on the table. Her expression had returned to calm neutrality, but there was something different in her eyes now. A quiet confidence that had not been there before. Graff stood slowly. Smoke still drifted around him. He looked down at Amy with an expression she could not quite read. Then he began to laugh. It was a deep, rumbling sound that filled the chamber. "You did not run," he said, still laughing. "You did not beg. You did not even hesitate." "No," Amy agreed. "I did not." Commander Drell stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with something that might have been respect. "How did you know the blast would not reach you?" he asked. His voice was quieter than Grath's but sharper. More intelligent. Amy gestured slightly at the barriers, the positioning, the careful setup of the room. "You arranged your protection before we arrived. The blast angle was calculated. The barriers positioned precisely. This was theater, not murder." Grath's laughter faded, but his eyes held a new light. "And if you had been wrong?" Amy met his gaze without blinking. "Then we would have both discovered I can be killed. But you already knew I was mortal. What you did not know was whether I would show fear." The war chief sat down again, leaning forward with his elbows on the scarred table. "No species has ever kicked the grenade back," he said quietly. "Most run. Some freeze. A few try to disable it. But none have simply returned it to sender. Perhaps," Amy said, "you should negotiate with better species." The smoke had barely cleared when Grath leaned forward, his massive form casting a shadow across the negotiation table. His yellow eyes studied Amy with new intensity. The casual mockery from before was gone, replaced by genuine curiosity. "You knew," Grath said. "It was not a question. You knew the grenade would not harm you." "How?" Amy uncrossed her hands and placed them flat on the table. Her posture remained relaxed, but there was purpose in her movements now. She had their attention. She had their respect, at least partially. Now she needed to keep it. "I have been watching since I entered this room," Amy said simply. "Everything you do has a reason. Everything you place has a purpose." Commander Drell moved closer to the table, his darker scales catching the overhead lighting. "Explain," he said. His voice was sharp with interest. Amy gestured toward the reinforced corner where Grath sat. "When we first arrived, I noticed the blast panels positioned behind you. They are not standard station equipment. You brought them and installed them specifically for this meeting." Grath's eyes narrowed slightly, but he said nothing. He wanted to hear more. "The panels are rated for close-range plasma explosions," Amy continued. "I recognized the manufacturer marks. Then I observed how you and your guards positioned yourselves. Always behind protection. Always at angles that would deflect blast force away from your bodies." One of the Kravik guards shifted uncomfortably. Amy noticed but kept speaking. "When you pulled the grenade from your belt, I saw the model. Class 3 plasma device. Standard Kravik military issue. I know the blast radius. Approximately 4 meters at full yield. The distance between us was 5 meters. But more importantly, I noticed the thermal reading." Drell tilted his head. "Thermal reading?" Amy pulled out a small handheld scanner from her jacket pocket. It was standard diplomatic equipment, designed to detect environmental hazards. She had been holding it loosely in her lap throughout the meeting, taking periodic readings. "A fully armed plasma grenade generates significant heat before detonation," Amy explained. "The chemical reaction inside begins the moment the pin is pulled. This creates a thermal signature of roughly 300 degrees at the casing surface." She held up the scanner, showing the recorded data. "Your grenade registered at 140 degrees. Hot enough to glow. Hot enough to seem dangerous. But not hot enough to be fully armed." Grath sat back in his chair. For the first time since the meeting began, he looked impressed. "You measured the temperature of my weapon while I was threatening you with it?" "Yes," Amy said. "It seemed like useful information." Commander Drell made a sound that might have been Kravik laughter. It was a harsh, clicking noise deep in his throat. "She was analyzing your intimidation tactic while you performed it," he said to Grath. "Like a scientist studies an experiment." Amy shook her head slightly. "Not a scientist. A soldier. The room grew quiet again. Grath leaned forward once more, his interest clearly heightened. Explain this, he demanded. Amy took a slow breath. She had not planned to reveal her background. Diplomats were supposed to be soft, civilian, focused only on words and agreements. But the Kraviks respected warriors. They understood combat. Maybe honesty would serve her better than pretense. Before I became a diplomat, I served in Earth's military, Amy said. My specialty was explosive ordnance disposal. I spent 6 years defusing bombs, disarming mines, and handling unstable explosives. Drell's eyes widened slightly. In Kravik culture, ordnance specialists were highly respected. They faced death daily and required both courage and technical skill. You dismantled explosives? He asked. Hundreds of them, Amy confirmed. On Earth, on colonies, on ships. I worked in war zones where every step might trigger a mine. Where every package might contain a bomb. I learned to read explosives the way you read combat situations. Every detail matters. Temperature, weight, sound, smell. Your grenade told me everything I needed to know in the first 2 seconds. Grath drummed his claws on the table. The sound was rhythmic, thoughtful. So when I rolled death toward you, you simply did not believe it was death. I knew it was theater, Amy corrected gently. Good theater. Effective theater. But theater nonetheless. You wanted to see if I would panic. If I would lose control. If I would become weak and desperate. And instead you kicked it back, Drell said. There was something like admiration in his voice now. Instead I called your bluff, Amy agreed. In ordnance disposal we have a saying. The bomb that makes the most noise is usually the least dangerous. The truly deadly ones are silent until the end. Grath made a rumbling sound in his chest. It took Amy a moment to realize he was laughing again, but quietly this time. Your species is stranger than we thought, he said. We were told humans were soft, emotional, easily frightened. We can be all those things, Amy said honestly. But we can also be very difficult to kill. Earth is not a gentle planet. We evolved in a world that tried to destroy us at every turn. Predators, diseases, natural disasters. We learned to study danger, understand it, and find ways to survive it. Drell moved around the table, studying Amy from a different angle. This ordnance work, he said. It must require steady hands. Calm mind. No fear. No, Amy corrected. It requires fear. Fear keeps you alert. Fear makes you careful. But it also requires control. You feel the fear and work anyway. You acknowledge death is possible and continue your task despite it. Grath nodded slowly. This concept resonated with Kravik philosophy. They did not expect warriors to be fearless. They expected warriors to be brave, which meant acting despite fear. When you defused explosives, Grath asked, how many times did you nearly die? Amy considered the question. Honestly, I stopped counting after the first dozen. There were situations where I had seconds to make decisions. Where one wrong move would have killed me and everyone nearby. You learn to think very fast in those moments. You learn to trust your training and your observations. And this is why you observed our blast panels, Drell said, understanding dawning. Why you measured thermal signatures. Why you calculated blast radius. Old habits. Survival habits, Amy said. They never really go away. Even now, as a diplomat, I automatically assess every room I enter. Where are the exits? Where is the cover? What are the potential threats? It is just how my mind works now. Grath stood and walked to the edge of the blast barriers that had protected him from his own grenade. He ran a claw along the scorched surface where the explosion had struck. We thought sending a soft diplomat would be insult, he said quietly. We thought Earth did not take these negotiations seriously. We were wrong. Earth takes these negotiations very seriously, Amy assured him. That is exactly why they sent me. Not despite my military background but because of it. They knew I would need to understand Kravik culture. Warrior culture. Where strength is respected and weakness is despised. Drell tilted his head, his sharp eyes gleaming. And now? What happens now that you have passed the grenade test? Amy smiled slightly. Now we negotiate properly. As equals. With mutual respect. Unless you have other tests planned? Grath returned to his seat. The atmosphere in the room had changed completely. The Kravik guards stood differently now, more relaxed. They no longer saw Amy as prey. They saw her as something else. Something worthy of attention. Oh, we have other tests, Grath said, and this time his smile seemed almost genuine. But first I have questions. The negotiations had moved to a different tone, but Grath was not finished testing. He stood at the observation window of Crosspoint 7, looking out at the wreckage of an old cargo vessel floating in the distance. The ship had been abandoned for years, its hull torn and dark against the stars. "I have a proposal," Grath said, turning back to face Amy. "A trial of worth. It is how we determine if someone truly deserves our respect." Amy had expected something like this. The grenade had been just the opening move. Kraviks always had more tests. "What kind of trial?" she asked. Commander Drell stepped forward, gesturing toward the derelict ship visible through the window. "That vessel out there. It has been prepared as a testing ground. Inside are various hazards, environmental dangers, combat scenarios, obstacles that require both mind and body to overcome." "You want me to go inside that ship?" Amy said flatly. "Yes," Grath replied. "If you can survive the trial and reach the central control room, the mining rights will be granted on fair terms. You will have proven yourself worthy of an equal partnership." Amy's diplomatic assistant, a young man named Tom, stepped closer. "Captain, this is highly irregular. We should contact Earth Command before agreeing to anything dangerous." Amy held up her hand, silencing him gently. She kept her eyes on Grath. "What happens if I refuse?" "Then negotiations end," Grath said simply. "We will assume humans are not strong enough for true alliance. Your people can find minerals elsewhere." It was a trap, but a predictable one. Amy had dealt with tests like this before, just in different forms. The Kraviks needed to see strength. They needed proof that humans could handle themselves in dangerous situations. Words alone would never convince them. "I accept," Amy said. "What are the rules?" Drell moved to a control panel and brought up a holographic display of the derelict ship's interior. "You enter through the airlock here. You must reach the control room at the ship's center. You will have standard environmental suit and basic tools. No weapons. No communication devices. No help from your team." "How long do I have?" Amy asked, studying the ship's layout. "As long as you need," Grath said. "But most species who attempt this do not last more than 30 minutes. The ship has been programmed to present various challenges. Some are physical. Some are mental. All are dangerous." Amy nodded slowly. She could see the pattern already. This was not about brute strength. The Kraviks were testing decision-making under pressure. They wanted to see how she handled threats, how she analyzed problems, how she adapted to changing situations. "When do we start?" Amy asked. "Now," Grath replied. "Unless you need time to prepare?" Amy shook her head. "No. I am ready." 20 minutes later, Amy stood in the airlock of the derelict ship. Her environmental suit was basic but functional. She had a handheld scanner, a multi-tool, and a small oxygen reserve pack. Nothing else. The airlock hissed open, revealing the dark interior of the abandoned vessel. Back on Crosspoint 7, Grath and his warriors watched through multiple camera feeds. The ship's monitoring system showed every corridor, every chamber, every trap waiting inside. Drell stood beside the warchief, his eyes fixed on the screens. "Most species run straight forward," Drell observed. "They rush, trying to complete the trial quickly. Then they trigger the traps." On screen, Amy moved slowly into the first corridor. She did not run. She walked carefully, her scanner held out in front of her. The device cast a pale blue glow in the darkness. "She is being cautious," one of the Kravik warriors commented. "Perhaps too cautious. The trial requires speed." "No," Grath said quietly. "Watch her. She is reading the environment." Amy's scanner detected multiple anomalies ahead. The corridor floor showed stress fractures and specific patterns. Too regular to be natural damage. She knelt down, examining the metal plates carefully. Then she noticed the small pressure sensors embedded in certain sections. Explosive traps. Step on the wrong plate and the floor would detonate. She used her multi-tool to mark safe paths with small reflective tags. Then she moved forward, stepping only on reinforced sections that showed no sensor activity. "She identified the pressure mines," Drell said with surprise. In less than 2 minutes, Amy reached the end of the corridor and entered a larger chamber. Immediately her scanner began screaming warnings. Toxic gas was leaking from damaged ventilation systems. The air was breathable near the entrance, but deeper into the room the concentration would be lethal even through her suit's filters. She stood still, studying the chamber. There was an exit door on the far side. The direct path would take her straight through the worst of the gas cloud. But Amy noticed something else. The gas was heavier than air, settling toward the floor. The ceiling area showed lower contamination. She looked up. Overhead pipes and support beams ran the length of the chamber. They looked old and damaged, but some still appeared structurally sound. Amy tested the first beam with her weight. It held. She climbed up, moving hand over hand along the ceiling structure, staying above the toxic gas layer below. On the observation screens, several Kravik warriors made clicking sounds of approval. "She thinks three-dimensionally," one said. "Like a hunter in trees." Grath said nothing, but his eyes never left the display. Amy dropped down on the far side of the chamber and moved into the next section. Here the challenge was different. The corridor ahead was dark, and her scanner showed heat signatures moving in the shadows. Combat drones. Simple machines programmed to attack intruders. She could hear them moving, their mechanical joints clicking softly in the darkness. There were at least 3 of them. Maybe more. Amy had no weapons. Fighting them directly would be foolish. She examined the corridor walls with her scanner. The ship's power systems were damaged but not completely dead. Emergency lighting circuits ran along the walls, dormant but still connected. She used her multi-tool to access a wall panel and rerouted power to the lighting systems. The corridor flooded with sudden bright light. The combat drones, designed for dark environments, had no filters for sudden illumination. Their optical sensors overloaded, causing them to freeze in place as their systems tried to compensate. Amy walked past them calmly while they remained stationary, their programming unable to handle the unexpected change. "She is not fighting," Drell observed. "She is changing the battlefield itself." "Yes," Grath agreed. His voice held a note of growing respect. The next chamber presented a different problem. The floor was partially collapsed, revealing a gap too wide to jump. Below the gap was a drop into darkness. Amy's scanner showed the fall was at least 20 meters. Fatal if she slipped. She looked around the chamber carefully. Cargo crates were scattered around the edges, remnants of the ship's old inventory. She opened several, finding old equipment and supplies. Most were useless, but one contained industrial cables and magnetic anchors. Amy secured one end of the cable to a support beam. She tested it with her full weight. It held. She used the magnetic anchors to create a guideline across the gap, then hand-walked across the cable. Her movements were steady and controlled, the result of years of training in dangerous environments. Halfway across the cable, something changed. The support beam began to shift, loosened by her weight. The cable started to sag. Amy did not panic. She increased her speed, pulling herself hand over hand faster, reaching the far side just as the beam tore free. The cable fell into the darkness behind her. On Crosspoint 7, the Kravik warriors were now fully engaged in watching. They had stopped talking. Every eye was on the screens. Amy continued deeper into the ship. Each chamber presented new challenges. A room with failing gravity systems that switched on and off randomly. A corridor filled with sharp debris that required careful navigation. A junction where multiple paths led in different directions, only one of which was safe. She handled each situation with the same methodical approach. Analyze the problem. Identify the real threat. Find a solution that used environment and tools rather than force. She never rushed. She never panicked. She moved like someone who had faced death many times before and learned to treat it as simply another problem to solve. Finally, after nearly an hour, Amy reached the central control room. She stepped inside and activated the terminal, sending the completion signal back to Crosspoint 7. Grath watched the signal appear on his display. Around him, his warriors were silent. They had never seen a species complete the trial quite like this. Most who succeeded did so through strength, speed, or aggressive tactics. Amy had succeeded through pure tactical thinking. "Bring her back," Grath ordered. Amy stood in the central control room, her hand on the terminal where she had just sent the completion signal. But something felt wrong. The room was too quiet. The terminal screen flickered, and instead of showing a success message, it displayed a new set of instructions. "Secondary trial initiated," the text read. "Proceed to emergency exit corridor. Time limit, 10 minutes. Amy's jaw tightened. This was not part of the original agreement. She tapped her scanner against the terminal, trying to access more information. The device showed her the ship's layout again, highlighting a route to an emergency corridor she had not seen before. She had no choice but to continue. Amy left the control room and followed the marked path. The corridors here were in worse condition than before. The walls were buckled and torn. Exposed wiring sparked occasionally in the darkness. Her scanner showed structural instability throughout this entire section. The emergency corridor appeared ahead. It was a narrow passage with thick blast doors at the far end. Those doors would lead to an escape pod bay, according to her scanner. Amy moved forward carefully, her boots crunching on debris. Halfway down the corridor she stopped. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Her scanner suddenly lit up with warnings. Radiation signatures. Chemical leaks. Structural collapse indicators. All at once. All severe. She looked more carefully at the walls around her. The damage patterns were strange. Too symmetrical. Too deliberate. Amy knelt down and examined the floor. She found what she was looking for almost immediately. Explosive charges. Hidden beneath metal plates. They were old but still active. But these were not simple trap explosives. These were demolition charges. The kind used to completely destroy structures. She sat back on her heels, her mind working through the implications. Then she understood. This was not a test she was meant to pass. This was a test she was meant to fail. On Crosspoint 7, Commander Drell watched the screens intently. "She has found the charges," he said quietly. Graf nodded. "She was always going to find them. The question is what she does now." One of the younger Kravik warriors looked confused. "I do not understand. What is the purpose of this final test?" "It is the impossible scenario," Drell explained. "The trial most species never reach. Those who do face a situation with no solution. The corridor ahead is rigged to collapse completely. The charges are on a timer that began when she entered. The blast doors are sealed. There is no way forward and no time to go back." "Then how is this a test?" the young warrior asked. "It is just death." "No," Graf said. "It is a test of how one faces certain defeat. Does she panic? Does she give up? Does she beg for rescue? We learn much about a species in their final moments." On screen, Amy was moving along the corridor walls, her scanner pressed against different sections. She was mapping something. Calculating. Back in the derelict ship, Amy had made her assessment. The demolition charges would detonate in approximately 8 minutes. The blast would collapse this entire section of corridor. The doors ahead were sealed and reinforced. Even with her multi-tool she could not cut through them in time. Going back the way she came would take too long. The explosion would catch her in the open corridors. She was trapped. Deliberately. Perfectly. But Amy had spent 6 years defusing explosives. She understood demolition work better than most people understood their own names. She knew how charges were placed, how they were timed, how they were designed to bring structures down in specific patterns. And she knew something else. Every demolition had a weak point. A direction where the blast force could be redirected. Amy pulled out her multi-tool and began working on the nearest wall panel. Behind it she found what she suspected would be there. Power conduits. Emergency systems. And most importantly, maintenance access tunnels. The ship's original design included ways for crew to move between sections during repairs. She used her scanner to map the tunnel system. Most were collapsed or blocked. But there was one path that remained partially intact. It ran parallel to the main corridor and led to a different section of the ship entirely. The problem was the tunnel entrance was sealed with a heavy metal plate. She could not remove it in time. Amy looked at the demolition charges again. Then she looked at the tunnel entrance. An idea formed. A dangerous idea. But it was the only idea she had. She moved quickly, examining each demolition charge without touching them. They were on a synchronized timer. All would explode simultaneously to ensure complete corridor collapse. But the charges nearest to the tunnel entrance were placed to blow inward, directing force down the main corridor. Amy opened her toolkit and removed several components. Wire. Adhesive. A small power cell from her scanner. She began working on the nearest charge, not to defuse it, but to modify it. On Crosspoint 7, Drell leaned forward sharply. What is she doing? She is not trying to disarm the charges. She is working on them. Graf's eyes widened slightly. She is changing their configuration. Amy worked with steady hands despite the time pressure. She redirected the blast orientation of 3 charges, angling them toward the sealed tunnel entrance instead of down the corridor. Then she used the adhesive and wire to connect them to her scanner's power cell, creating a separate trigger. She had 4 minutes left on the main timer. That was enough. Amy positioned herself against the far wall, as far from the charges as possible while still maintaining a direct line to the tunnel. She activated her improvised trigger. The 3 modified charges detonated with a sharp crack. The blast was focused and directed. The explosion tore through the metal plate sealing the tunnel entrance, peeling it back like thin paper. Smoke and debris filled the corridor, but Amy was already moving. She dove through the smoking hole into the maintenance tunnel beyond. 5 seconds later, the main demolition charges exploded. The entire corridor collapsed exactly as designed. Metal and debris crashed down, sealing the path Amy had just escaped from. The sound was deafening even through the tunnel walls. Amy lay flat in the narrow tunnel, waiting for the rumbling to stop. Dust settled around her. Her ears rang from the explosions. But she was alive. And she was no longer trapped. She crawled forward through the maintenance tunnel. It was tight and uncomfortable, but her scanner showed it connected to an intact section of the ship. After several minutes of crawling, she emerged into a cargo bay. From there she found her way to a functioning airlock. On Crosspoint 7, the monitoring screens showed only static where the corridor had been. The cameras there were destroyed. But other cameras picked up Amy's signal as she moved through the cargo bay toward the airlock. The Kravik warriors stood in complete silence. They had never seen anything like this. Most species who reached the impossible scenario simply waited for rescue or tried futilely to escape. None had ever used the demolition charges themselves as an escape tool. Drell turned to Grath. She changed the trial itself. She took the weapon meant to kill her and made it into her salvation. She created a third option where only two existed, Grath said slowly. There was something in his voice Amy would have recognized. It was respect. Deep, genuine respect. One of the warriors spoke up. But she violated the trial rules. She was supposed to reach the emergency exit. She created a new exit entirely. Exactly, Grath replied. In real combat there are no rules. There is only survival. She showed us what humans do when faced with impossible situations. They make the impossible irrelevant. Amy cycled through the airlock and began the short shuttle ride back to Crosspoint 7. She was exhausted, covered in dust, and her environmental suit was damaged in several places. But she was alive. And she had a feeling the negotiations were about to get much more interesting. Amy stepped off the shuttle and back onto Crosspoint 7. Her environmental suit was torn in 3 places and covered in dust and scorch marks. Her hair was matted with sweat. She probably looked like she had been through a war. In a way she had. Grath waited at the docking bay with Commander Drell and a dozen Kravik warriors. As Amy approached, every warrior present struck their chests with closed fists. It was a Kravik salute. A sign of respect given only to proven fighters. Amy stopped in front of Grath and met his eyes. She was too tired to be diplomatic. Too exhausted for careful words. That trial was rigged, she said bluntly. The final corridor was designed to be impossible. Yes, Grath replied without hesitation. It was. You wanted to see me fail. No, Drell interjected. We wanted to see how you faced failure. There is a difference. Grath gestured toward a nearby conference room. Come. We have much to discuss. Your team is waiting inside. Amy followed them into the room. Tom and the other human diplomats rushed forward, relief obvious on their faces. Tom handed her a water container and a clean jacket. She accepted both gratefully. Captain, we saw the explosions on the monitors, Tom said. We were afraid. I am fine, Amy assured him. Tired but fine. Grath took his seat at the conference table. The grenade scorch marks from earlier were still visible on the surface. Drell sat beside him, and the other Kravik warriors arranged themselves around the room. The atmosphere was completely different from the first meeting. There was no hostility now. No testing. Just a sense of anticipation. You used our own demolition charges as an escape tool, Grath said. It was not an accusation. It was almost admiration. In 6 generations of trials, no species has ever done that. Amy sat down across from him. The charges were the only resource available. It would have been wasteful not to use them. Most species see explosives as weapons or threats, Drell observed. You see them as tools. As solutions to problems. That is what they are, Amy said simply. Explosives are just controlled energy release. The same blast that destroys a building can also create a mining tunnel or clear debris. It depends on how you use them. Grath leaned back in his chair. You broke the trial rules. You were supposed to reach the emergency exit. Instead you created your own exit. The rules said reach an exit, Amy corrected. They did not specify which exit. And if I remember correctly, the trial was meant to test whether I deserve fair partnership. I believe surviving an impossible scenario demonstrates that better than following a path that leads nowhere. Several Kravik warriors made that clicking sound that passed for laughter. Even Grath's stern expression softened slightly. We had a debate after you escaped, Drell said. Some argued you cheated. That using the demolition charges was against the spirit of the trial. And what did you argue? Amy asked. I argued that you showed exactly what Kraviks value most, Drell replied. Adaptability under pressure. Creative thinking in combat situations. The willingness to change the battlefield when you cannot win on existing terms. Graf nodded slowly. In our culture there is a saying. A warrior who follows orders dies in glory. A warrior who changes orders survives to fight again. We value those who can think beyond the expected. Amy took a long drink of water. Her throat was dry from breathing dust and smoke. So what happens now? Do we continue negotiations or do I need to pass more tests? No more tests, Graf said firmly. You have proven yourself 3 times over. The grenade. The trial. The impossible scenario. No human needs to prove anything further to the Kraviks sovereignty. He stood and pulled out a data tablet. We are prepared to offer revised terms. Equal partnership. 50-50 profit split on all mining operations. Shared security responsibilities. Technology exchange programs. Full diplomatic recognition. Amy blinked in surprise. These were better terms than she had hoped for. Better than Earth Command had authorized her to accept. That is very generous, she said carefully. It is not generosity, Graf corrected. It is recognition of equals. We do not make partnerships with weak species. We do not share power with those who cannot handle it. But you have shown that humans can handle danger, complexity, and impossible situations. That makes you worthy allies. Drell placed another tablet on the table. We also propose joint training programs. Human explosive specialists working with Kravik engineers. Human tactical analysts consulting with our military commanders. There is much we can learn from each other. Amy looked at the terms displayed on the tablets. They were everything Earth needed and more. But she had learned to be cautious with the Kraviks. What is the cost? She asked. There is always a cost. The cost is honesty, Graf said. We expect humans to be direct with us. No hidden agendas. No manipulation. If there are problems, you tell us. If there are disagreements, we solve them face to face. The way warriors solve problems. I can agree to that, Amy said. Earth values direct communication as well. She stood and extended her hand across the table. Graf looked at the gesture, then grasped her hand with his much larger clawed one. His grip was firm but controlled. They shook once, sealing the agreement in the human manner. Then Graf did something unexpected. He laughed. A deep, genuine laugh that filled the room. There is something I must tell you, he said. Something that makes this moment even better. Amy raised an eyebrow. What is that? The grenade from our first meeting, Graf said. The one I rolled at you. It was completely inert. A training prop. It could not have exploded even if I wanted it to. Amy felt a smile tugging at her lips. I know. Graf's laughter stopped abruptly. You knew? Yes, Amy said. The thermal signature was wrong. The weight distribution was off when it rolled. And the beeping pattern did not match a live charge. It was obviously a dummy device. Commander Drell stared at her. But you kicked it back anyway. You smiled at me. You acted as if you were calling a real bluff. I was calling a real bluff, Amy replied. The bluff was not whether the grenade would explode. The bluff was whether I would show fear. So I decided not to show fear. I kicked it back to establish dominance, exactly like you were trying to establish dominance over me. Graf sat down heavily. Then he started laughing again, even harder than before. You were testing me while I was testing you. Of course, Amy said. Did you think only Kraviks conduct tests? I needed to know if you were serious about negotiations or just looking for excuses to reject Earth's proposal. Your reaction to the grenade kick told me everything. You were surprised. Impressed. That meant you could be reasoned with. Drell shook his head in amazement. We thought we were playing a game with you. But you were playing the same game with us. Not a game, Amy corrected. A negotiation. Both sides testing. Both sides learning. Both sides deciding if partnership is possible. Graf wiped his eyes, still chuckling. I think I like humans. You are sneaky. Strategic. You pretend to be soft but you are like... What is your earth animal? The one that looks harmless but has poison. A snake? Tom suggested from the side of the room. No, the small furry one, Graf said, gesturing vaguely. A platypus? Amy offered. Yes, that one. Looks strange and harmless. But has venom spurs. That is humans. Amy laughed despite her exhaustion. I will take that as a compliment. Graf stood again and raised his fist to his chest in salute. This is not a trade agreement we are making. This is a warrior's pact. Between equals who have tested each other and found mutual strength. Let the records show that on this day the Kraviks sovereignty and Earth formed an alliance based on respect, honesty and shared courage. All the Kravik warriors in the room repeated the salute. Amy returned it in the human way, placing her hand over her heart. One more thing, Drell said. We would like to request that you specifically handle future negotiations with Kravik territories. We trust you. We understand you. We do not want to start over with some new diplomat who does not know our ways. Amy smiled. I will make that recommendation to Earth Command. Though I think after today's report, they will probably insist on it anyway. Tom approached with the formal documents ready for signature. As Amy reviewed them one final time, Grath spoke quietly. Thank you for not running from the grenade. That single moment changed everything. It showed us that humans are not what we expected. You are better. Thank you for giving me the chance to prove it, Amy replied. Not every species would have. She signed the documents. Grath added his mark. The alliance was official. As Amy prepared to leave Crosspoint 7 and return to Earth, she looked back at the Kravik delegation one last time. They stood at attention, fists over their chests, honoring her departure the way they would honor a returning war hero. She had come to negotiate mining rights. She was leaving with something far more valuable. An alliance built on mutual respect. A partnership between warriors who understood each other. And the knowledge that sometimes the best way to handle a threat is to kick it right back where it came from.